The distress beacon had been pulsing for 3 days before Marcus Chen's salvage vessel picked it up. Most haulers would have ignored it. Distress calls in the outer reaches were usually traps set by pirates or worse. But Marcus had always been the kind of fool who couldn't ignore a cry for help. The source was a derelict Scythian cargo ship, its hull breached in a dozen places. Atmosphere venting into the void. Marcus suited up and mag-locked across the gap between vessels, his helmet light cutting through the darkness of the dead ship's corridors. He found her in what must have been the cargo bay. The creature was massive, easily 4 meters long with 6 limbs ending in wicked talons and a serpentine body covered in midnight blue scales that shimmered like oil on water. Her triangular head bore 3 eyes, each the size of Marcus's fist and rows of crystalline teeth that could shred plasteel. By all accounts, she was a Drachmora, one of the galaxy's apex predators feared across 100 systems. She was also dying. A metal beam had pinned her lower body, and a pool of luminescent green blood had spread beneath her. But what made Marcus's breath catch wasn't the injury. It was her swollen abdomen pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. She was pregnant. The Dracora's eyes fixed on him, and Marcus felt a pressure in his mind. Not words, but emotions. Fear, desperation, pleading. Every instinct screamed at him to leave. Dracora were killers, responsible for wiping out entire colonies. They couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be tamed. The Galactic Council had declared them a shoot-on-sight species decades ago. Marcus looked into those alien eyes and saw a mother. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay, I've got you." It took 2 hours to cut through the beam with his plasma torch and another hour to stabilize her enough for transport. The Dracora never attacked him. She watched with those unblinking eyes as he worked, occasionally sending waves of emotion through that strange mental connection. Gratitude, hope, trust. Getting her aboard his ship was a nightmare. She weighed nearly a ton, and even with the cargo bay's grav assist, Marcus thought his back would break. He set her up in the largest cargo hold, surrounded by emergency medical supplies he barely knew how to use on human anatomy, let alone alien biology. For 3 days he stayed by her side. He cleaned her wounds, adjusted the atmosphere to match Dracora environmental preferences according to his ship's database, and talked to her. He told her about Earth, about his sister back home, about the stars he'd seen in his years of hauling cargo across the galaxy. She listened, her mental presence a constant warm weight in his thoughts. On the 4th day, she began the laying process. Marcus had read that Dracora gave live birth, but apparently that was wrong, or maybe she was a different subspecies. Her body convulsed, and from a hidden orifice 2 eggs emerged, each the size of a basketball, their shells a translucent amber that glowed from within. The mother Dracora gathered them close with her clawed arms, her breathing labored. Marcus could feel her weakening, the mental connection growing fainter. "Hey, no," he said, moving closer. "Stay with me. Your babies need you." She turned her massive head toward him, and for a moment her eyes blazed with an intensity that made his heart skip. Then, gently, she pushed the eggs toward him with one clawed limb. The meaning was clear. "No," Marcus protested. "You're going to be fine. Just hold on." But she was fading. Her thoughts brushed his mind one final time. Not words, but a torrent of images and feelings. Her children safe, growing strong, and always the image of his face, suffused with trust and something that felt almost like love. Then she was gone. Marcus sat in stunned silence, staring at the 2 glowing eggs before him. What the hell was he supposed to do now? He knew nothing about raising alien hatchlings. Dracora were dangerous, illegal to harbor, and would grow large enough to tear apart his ship. The eggs pulsed with light as if sensing his turmoil. "Damn it," he muttered, and carefully moved them to a climate-controlled container. The eggs hatched 2 weeks later. Marcus had been checking on them every few hours, monitoring their temperature and the increasingly complex bioluminescent patterns dancing across their shells. When the first cracks appeared, he sat cross-legged before the container, watching with a mixture of fear and wonder. The first hatchling emerged in a tumble of wet scales and flailing limbs. It was about the size of a cat, its scales a lighter shade of blue than its mother's, and it had her 3 eyes and crystalline teeth. It took one breath and turned those eyes directly on Marcus, and something clicked. The mental connection was immediate and overwhelming. Marcus gasped as emotions flooded through him: curiosity, hunger, recognition. But beneath it all was something primal and absolute: bond, master, Pack leader. Father. The second hatchling broke free moments later, identical to its sibling, and the feeling doubled. Two minds reaching out to his, imprinting on him with an intensity that made his eyes water. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Marcus breathed. But he was already reaching out, and the hatchlings scrambled toward his hands with chirps that sounded almost like purrs. They climbed onto his lap, their sharp claws carefully sheathed, their mental voices a constant happy chorus in his mind. They nuzzled against him, seeking warmth and comfort. And despite everything, despite the danger, despite the impossibility, despite the fact that he was now the guardian of two creatures that would grow into apex predators, Marcus felt his heart melt. "All right," he said, gently stroking their scales as they curled against him. "All right, we'll figure this out. But you're going to need names." The hatchlings thrummed with contentment, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing in sync with his heartbeat. Humanity had always been the species that took in strays, that formed bonds with creatures that should have been their predators. Dogs had been wolves once. Cats had been wildcats. Why should the galaxy be any different? Marcus Chen smiled, cradling two alien monsters in his arms, and plotted a course for the frontier worlds where questions were rarely asked, and families came in all shapes and sizes. Behind him, ignored and forgotten, the Galactic Council's warning about Dracora flickered on his communication screen. But some bonds, Marcus was learning, transcended law and logic. Some bonds were simply meant to be.